Good morning and welcome to April's Microsoft 365 Government Community Call. I'm Jay Leask. I'm joined as usual by Jeremy Wood, and you may have noticed we're missing a couple of our regular colleagues. Unfortunate that Sarah and Rima are unable to join us this month, but we've got a great show, the usual April content, and then of course a guest from Microsoft, Erica Toelle, who will be helping update us on what's going on with Microsoft in the records and information governance arena. Jeremy, how's it going? Welcome to April.
It's going great. It's good to see you.
Likewise, it's been a weird couple of months, but I'm very excited. We're starting to see conferences come back. We're starting to have customer meetings in person again. You know, still, of course, doing our best to be safe, but it's almost like, knock on the closest piece of wood, almost like things are coming back to normal. So, Jeremy, want to kick off on the community events? I guess I'm kicking off, aren't I?
You're kicking off. Yeah, that's our normal, right?
So here we are, April 12th, and today, actually this morning, the Microsoft Government CMMC Ask Me Anything with Paul Meacham, Richard Wakeman, Justin Orcutt, Marianne Rousseau, and Lisa Haywood. Again, it was this morning, but the good news is these AMAs on the tech community, they are in writing. So all of that great conversation, the questions and answers that come from it, you can access them immediately following this show. Not right now, you're focused on us, of course, but you can access them in the tech community, link in the chat, and you get to see everything that was talked about in the CMMC discussion. That's a rapidly changing space also. You know, just in the last 6 months, we saw a new iteration going from 5 to 3 pillars. So there's a lot of change there, a lot of questions coming up. So make sure you check that out. Also tomorrow, the DC Power Platform User Group is meeting. Stefan Strub is talking about supplier and relationship management. So make sure you take a look at that. And Jeremy, these are all me, huh? How did that even happen?
Because you're important.
That's what my mom always told me. April 14th, so Thursday, Jeff Teeper is going to be talking to the SharePoint user group of DC about collaboration in Microsoft 365 with Teams and SharePoint. Jeff always has a great conversation. The fact that he's going to be speaking at the DC user group, this is, I think, a big deal for the DC area agencies, so make sure you check it out. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about before I hand it over to Jeremy, and I promise I didn't write who was saying what. This is actually Jeremy's fault. I take no blame here. The last piece that I've got on my list is the end of the month, I'm going to be in Denver at the AIM conference. AIM is a records and information governance industry specialist industry organization. They have local groups all over the country, and this is their big government or big annual conference. I'm going to be there. All of the major vendors are there. I know Microsoft should be well represented. And so make sure if you are going to be there, let us know. Come see us at the booth, the AvePoint booth. Come see sessions by specialists from all across the space, including hopefully our guests, should all things work out. And that's April 27th, 8th, and 9th, I think, or somewhere in that week. So make sure you check it out. And that's enough for me. I've been talking for like 5 minutes straight. Jeremy, tell us something.
All right. Well, there's a to be determined date for the Azure Government Meetup. They kind of do that on a rolling basis where they'll jump out there with the topic. They tend to meet closer to the end of the month. Their previous topic, which you can go and see, was the Art of the Possible, AI in Government, which I attended and was very, very good. So it's a fantastic group. You should check it out. And then, as always, I will always continue to carry the flag for the NARA Microsoft 365 group. Their next meeting's on May 5th. Topic is still up in the air, but at the last month, if you were not at the last, or at this, I guess this month, April, earlier in April, they had the Department of Energy come in and talk about their program. And if you are in government or work with government and have a government account, the link we'll post in the chat will get you to the NARA user group, and you can access the materials from all the previous meetings that they have.
Yeah. And Jeremy, I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Lisa and Bethany from NARA are going to be joining us next month. We're having the conversation today on what Microsoft is doing for records and information governance. And next month, Lisa and Beth are going to come in and talk about what NARA is doing from a policy perspective. So very excited to have them join us. Yeah.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And then in our roadmap update, just a couple items. Microsoft List and SharePoint document libraries are getting a customizable gallery view. They actually should be active in your tenant now, but as we know, there's the rolling tenant rollout, so you may not see it. It's going to be in GCC High, and DoD, and really it lets you create a card view of your list of data, which is really kind of unique and good. Then sometime this month, we should be seeing Whiteboard external access in Teams meetings. And this is if you have a guest or an external user or anonymous user, they'll be able to access the Whiteboard during the meeting, but not afterwards. And that feature should be rolling out sometime this month for GCC and GCC High. Back to you, Jay, for community news.
Yeah, just on the Whiteboard stuff. Have you played with it much, Jeremy? Have you gotten the opportunity to play with it?
Whiteboard has gotten really, really good. I remember when I first wanted it, it was really just a whiteboard, just a blank screen with some inking that you could do. Yes. But now it's got tons of templates. I think we mentioned in a previous roadmap thing, I was very excited about it. And now they're upping the game even more because now you'll be able to do external, which for my prior agency is a big deal because they wanted to leverage Teams for training of their industry, their partners in other countries. And they couldn't access the whiteboard. So it was one more thing that tool didn't work for. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, I've recently gotten to using it more as we're back in a hybrid office because we have Surface, the big surfaces, the conference room surface. And what I really liked about it is I'm in the conference room writing on a virtual whiteboard, but a big whiteboard in a conference room. And our VP of product was at home in Jersey City, not only watching me write, but then using his touchscreen laptop to also share and write on it. So it's really cool. So especially as the government agencies are starting to adopt newer technologies, I think Whiteboard is something we should be looking at a lot. It's maybe not as conducive when you're using a mouse, but still being able to share what you're doing from the conference room to the desk, to the home desk, et cetera. It's really, really cool stuff. Couple pieces of news from the community, and if you're curious where we're getting this from, the primary source for this new stuff is the Microsoft Public Sector Tech Community, run by one of our usual hosts, Sarah. So make sure you jump in the chat and grab it, the link to it, and go join and participate. Three primary things from the last month. The first one, there's a federal business applications webinar on April 22nd. With Microsoft Global Black Belt Director Dave Milton. The second piece, actually, we should have put that in the community events. Like I just thinking about that as I'm saying it. Anyway, Microsoft Teams Emergency Operations Center templates are now in public preview. So that's a pretty big deal. And then there's also a good article. Richard Wakeman's been running this for a while on the history of the Microsoft Cloud offerings, which leading to the U.S. Sovereign Cloud Series. If you ever find yourself curious, what's the difference between GCC and GCC High and DoD, and what is Azure Commercial versus Azure Gov? This series is really good at explaining those things in detail. So make sure you check it out. It will make you sound more, if you don't already know, like you know what you're talking about, which is good when you're talking to different vendors, because that shared vocabulary is super important to make sure we all are saying the same thing and not talking against each other. And that might have been more condescending than I meant for it to sound. I apologize if it was. That wasn't my intention at all. That's it for the events roadmap and news from the community. Let's jump right into our interview.
Well, we want to welcome Erica Telly from Microsoft. She's Senior Product Marketing Manager for Records and Information Governance. And Erica and I go way back. I have had her on my Geek Within podcast, and she's been a guest on the NARA user group that I attend. So as I said, I'm a big fan of the NAR user group. And so we welcome you to joining us today, Erica.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's awesome having you, Erica. You're a big driver in how Microsoft has improved records and information governance support. So very happy to have you on board to talk about what you've been doing.
Yeah, I think we have some exciting things to share.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, what's driving Microsoft's information management story for government?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd be lying if we didn't say it was records. And that's because the federal government has much more mature records management requirements than a lot of private industries. Everything because all the great work NARA does with the GRS and how every agency has really gone through and developed their own retention schedules for their unique information. Once you have the requirements in place, it's a million times easier to configure the technology to meet them.
I was just going to say it straddling the defense and federal civilian space, as I have for the last few years, and then occasionally supporting our commercial business. It is really interesting to see the requirements for records and information management and the maturity of those requirements in the federal space as opposed to commercial. Like you said, it's really a massive driver. And even in the commercial space, when we're having conversations with people, we're talking about not just we're trying to turn the conversation away from just records because they don't, unless you're in a highly regulated space, it's not really something that you're investing in. And whereas with the government, it's a clear investment. It's a federally required thing that you have to be doing from the Army all the way into the Treasury. So
absolutely. And I think that brings up an interesting trend that we're seeing where, records management is great for highly regulated industries and definitely government industries. But what's really interesting is that we're starting to see more and more records management-like requirements for everybody else with the advent of privacy regulations and also the need to really manage the data lifecycle so that you're having less information if it's happens to be in a data breach, or just generally less information that you have to protect, secure, and these more like security focused requirements. It's going to be really interesting to watch that space in the coming months and years.
Yeah, I've also seen a really interesting trend recently for customers who are looking to ensure that the right data is available and that that data that is not necessary has some form of life cycle. And so being able to not just identify a record, but what type of information are we dealing with? And to use the old saying, am I looking at PII, personally identifiable information, which has strong policies to back how it can be used, or am I looking at the cafeteria lunch menu now that we're starting to go back into the office? And those different types of information have different requirements, and it, to be clogging up our storage, for example, with lots of pictures, but of irrelevant long-term mission information is it's not something we want to be doing. And in fact, I'm curious, Erica, this is a little bit off the cuff here, but I've been getting a lot of emails recently about my OneDrive and how videos are being removed as we've hit the lifecycle policy there. How is something like that affecting the information governance story for Microsoft 365?
Yeah, so when I think about the story for M365 specifically, really, I believe our role is to provide the configuration options so that we can meet, the policies of every organization, every government in the world, no matter the size. And I think that the meeting recording option is a great example. The Microsoft Teams product group has provided an auto expiration option, but for those that need it, you can set a retention policy specifically on recordings through the records management tool. So, there's just a number of configuration options there. And I believe, the requirements specifically for federal government are still being defined by NARA. And so,
Yeah.
as those evolve, we'll be able to meet them right away.
So speaking of that, as you talk about the requirements kind of evolving for government, how does the government cloud differ from commercial? Are they on par, or are there accreditation roadblocks that you run into?
Yeah, I was really glad to hear you mention Richard Wakeman's series in the intro. I'll be honest, everything I know is from his series,
Yeah.
and there's probably nuances that I don't even understand. I think just from a pure information governance and records management perspective, there are foundational platform-wide capabilities that we rely on for some of our features. Multi-stage disposition is a great example. That was in general availability, I believe, last September for commercial, but it's still coming soon, but still coming for all the government clouds, because there is, a service that we rely on that had to be in place in government clouds before we could release that. I hope Microsoft's getting better at that. I know for records management, we're really pushing releasing simultaneously with at least GCC along with commercial, and then whenever possible, high and DoD at the same time. Adaptive policy scopes is a great example of that actually happening in real life.
Yeah, speaking of that, because that is a fairly recent feature, what are some of the newest features you've released that excited you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could start with the adaptive policy scopes, because that's one that was very much driven by federal government requirements for capstone email retention.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's great that we can have these policies on organization-wide specific applications like email or SharePoint, but oftentimes there's very real reasons why you might have a different set of policies for a certain division, for certain people like capstone officials. So how do we do that? Adaptive policy scopes is the how we accomplish that requirement. So using capstone as an example, we can look at the properties of the user's profile, their Active Directory profile. It lists stuff like their job title, their department.
Yep. And
there's actually 15 custom attributes available to you in your IT department, where you could even come up with your own classification, like, is this person a capstone official, yes or no?
Right.
And then we can say, if capstone official equals yes, then apply this retention and deletion policy to them. So, that's hugely important both for capstone. Also, it helps if you are operating multiple divisions or agencies in a single tenant that need to have different policies. It just opens up such a wide variety of use cases.
Yeah, we do on the governance side of your workspaces and such. We also look at those same capabilities. So it's nice to see Microsoft, bringing that to the table from an information governance perspective. And it's important that, I don't know who we have listening today. Tell us in the chat if you're on the IT admin side or the records management side, having seen Erica's name. But, it's important that these two different groups work together to make sure that the attributes you're creating are relevant in an outcome-based solution. If the RIM team needs a department to know who the owning org is, or to be able to tie it to owning org for records or something like that, it's good to make sure that you're working with the IT administrative side to get those included in Active Directory, because it allows you to automate so much more than if you're trying to do lookups against databases and things like that. So it's the adaptive scopes, great thing to see. Are there anything else that I think in the last month I saw your integration with the Power Platform come out? Anything else that's particularly exciting that you want to share?
Yeah, since you mentioned integration with Power Automate, I'll just clarify. It's something that is on our public roadmap. It'll be coming to public preview and commercial in June, and then GA and government clouds TBD, hopefully September. That one's also a really key one for federal government audiences, and here's why. You because your requirements for records management are so mature, you have a disposition approval process already defined that you want to use. What the Power Automate integration allows you to do is configure a custom workflow to do that. Now, I say configure because it is quite a visual, drag and drop, change properties type interface, but I think you will probably need IT help to configure that. So it's another great example of why you want to partner together.
Yep.
And we hope in the future, like for example, when NARA starts accepting electronic records through APIs, again, we have the technology on our side ready to go as soon as that's available.
Yeah, it's good to see those advancements start, rolling out. And this is one of those areas where I remember 2 years ago, I'd be doing workshops on Office 365 and being told, don't talk about anything that's not in GCC or GCC High today. And I think more and more we are seeing those timelines condense. So even though, and thank you for the clarification on the timing of that, even though it's not in the government yet, we do need to be paying attention to those things so that we're planning what can we do today? How can we solve the requirements that we have with today's technology? What do we know is on the roadmap for 6-12 months? And where can third-party partners, help to support, whether it's a supplementing the long-term roadmap or bridging us until we get there? Which leads me to my next question. Erica, you and I are talking a lot, both in the community and on the business side. So can you talk to us a little bit how you're working with partners to ensure that, that our government customers have a complete information governance story?
Yeah. And I think AvePoint's a great example of that. Just to further expand on that, when we talked with AvePoint about adaptive policy scopes, almost a year ago now, right away, you guys were like, yes, as soon as it's available, we want to make sure AvePoint governance is able to classify the SharePoint sites in Microsoft 360 groups, which is for teams, so that you can use adaptive policy scopes right away with it. And that was huge.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of how we like to work with partners. We have regular update meetings with partners to let them know what's coming and provide example scenarios for why we're building it. And then they give us ideas about how customers might use it and what they need to integrate it in with their products. And then also that's a huge investment area for us this year is creating what are called graph APIs, which is really what partners such as AvePoint use to develop their products and talk back and forth with Microsoft 365. But we're going to be developing a full set of graph APIs for records management. So, let's say that you hate the Compliance Center interface and you want to use a different one. Well, AvePoint can build one for you in a product, and you'll be using the same technology on our side just through your user interface. Because really, it should be customers need to be free to accomplish their requirements how they see fit, and that's our goal. This is another example of that.
Yeah, and anytime that as a partner, we can have someone like you leading the charge, where you are A, informing of us of what's coming, and B, pushing for those integrations like the Graph API. It's always a welcome thing. So thank you so much for that. Can you talk a little bit about the trajectory of, actually, I think we did talk about this a little bit here, how you're building features for the government clouds on information governance. You talked a little bit about how the government seems to be almost steering that direction, having the more stringent requirements on records. And you talked a little bit about how, the commercial versus GCC high and that timing. But is there anything else that would be appropriate here to talk through, what you're looking at? For example, you mentioned the long-term goal of being able to partner with NARA for automatic transfer. Is there anything else like that you think is that you can talk to?
Yeah, and this is all
Stumbled through that.
just, yeah, no problem. I know what you meant. So these are all ideas, and Jeremy and Jay, as experts in this area, I'd actually love to hear your point of view as well. One of the things I'm really looking at again is how the idea of lifecycle management, what we call records management, is related to security.
Yeah.
Security has a lot of funding, it has a lot of high level attention, and I do believe that truly managing the life cycle of your information is tied to a good security posture.
Yep.
I think it's just we need to do some work to identify the exact scenarios, the exact data behind that, and the why. And so I'm spending a lot of time right now talking with security decision makers around that, to understand those questions, but also to understand where it is in terms of priority, and is that priority because it actually is less important than these other things, or because they've always had their records manager handling it, so they haven't really thought about it. What do you think the tie is between information governance, lifecycle management, and security?
Ooh. Jeremy, I'd love to hear from you first, as being actually in the space as opposed to me just watching it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the features we haven't even talked about, right, that are in the compliance and security functionality really come into play there, right? You have the insider risk, and you have the communications compliance. Those tools, I think, have a tighter connection to security work than, say, the information management. But at the same time, retention of content is an issue, right? Data is an issue, management of that data and who has access to it. We spend an awful lot of time in my organization talking about what happens when it's time for disposition and who should be able to see that data, because there's so many sensitive things we capture that are a record. In the government, we always talk about least privilege, and then all of a sudden you roll out information management, and now you're saying, oh, should the records manager, every agency I've ever worked at, the records management staff want access to everything. They want to see it all because they don't trust that we're classifying it correctly.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they should see it all, because the sensitivity of the information. So I think there's a balance in how organizations implement those features to balance out that security that is really, really hard. And most of that's organizational and not technology.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that one, Jeremy, being able to talk to who should have access to this information and how do they manage it. We are having a ton of conversations around zero trust right now. And one of the things that we've noticed on the zero trust side is lots to do on the service and network side, and lots to do on the data as an individual piece of content side. But that middle space of the workspace, the team, the SharePoint site collection, there's conversation about permissions, but then you have access to anything inside it. And how do you know, if for example, if you create a team, and that team is going to have ITAR data, export controlled data, then what are you doing at the team level to make sure the owner or the person who created it, who is now the technical administrator, whether or not they have the training, is protecting that data? And I think that's a huge part of the information governance story. And Erica, one of the places that we're working together, a certain federal agency that I don't know if I can name drop or not, so I'm not going to, but they're looking at the information governance tool set that you bring to the table, and they're looking at the workspace governance set that we bring to the table, and they're using both of those together because they know that story ensures that they capture more about the information, both the records and the non-records, I'll use it quotation marks, for those in the know, but they're making sure they capture more through the workspace to start, which and then enables your information governance tools, the more traditional records capabilities to work smarter. And so absolutely, from a security perspective, it's the same thing. And to consider them separate conversations, as we've seen so often, I think is not only a disservice, but it's actually putting your agency at a disadvantage when it comes time to what could the tools be doing for us that they're not, because we simply aren't sharing the requirements and the technical capabilities with the right people.
Yeah, and maybe just to tie both your points together, now this is in no way product truth or in the product today, but like, what if, for example, our information governance tool was able to help records managers define the different life cycle stages of a type of content? Like,
Right.
First it starts out as highly confidential. You have a MIP, a sensitivity label on that. Insider risk management knows if something with that life cycle stage is leaked, it's a higher priority.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, it becomes public information subject to FOIA requests. So we know when it hits that stage that it needs to have a public sensitivity label, that it's not as urgent, if large amounts of data get leaked. I think that there's just an interesting, opportunity here to start using records managers' expertise about each category of data and the life cycle it moves through, and using that to inform our security policies as well at a more granular level.
It's actually one of the things I really love about what the records industry is doing. 5 to 10 years ago, you were a records manager, and you focused on the data and what the legal ramifications of that piece of data were. And now, if you look at the information governance space, which encompasses that, they're encouraging you to learn more about the technical capabilities. They're encouraging you more to think about the workspace that content is in. And I think that's the right direction for success, especially in a time where the amount of content we're creating and the pace at which that content is being created. Mm-hmm. If all we're thinking about is the individual file, the individual record itself, we're missing so much, and we're not going to be able to scale to meet it. So I like where the industry is going, and I think that I'm seeing more and more the traditional records officer involved in conversations with the technology. I've probably said it on this show before, but one of my favorite conversations was at an industry day for the Department of Interior, when they were looking at switching from where they were rebidding their collaboration platform, which at the time was the Google Workspaces. And someone asked in the room, what is the records requirement for your new collaboration space? And someone who hadn't been talking at all stood up in the back or on the side and said, "Hi, I'm the records officer for Department of Interior, and I can assure you that whereas we were not part of the conversation when Google was selected the first time, we are very much part of the conversation this time, because it's simply unacceptable that we can't meet the requirements of the agency and what NARA is putting out." So I think you're right. Like, that tie together the technologist, the traditional technologist, and the traditional information manager, bringing that together is huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would also add that, I think the technology stack is there. And you're adding all new functionality as we go. That makes it even easier and better to do, more likely that we're going to leverage it. I still think agencies have a people problem. I'll say this as a government person. I can't speak for my current agency. I don't speak for my current agency. In fact, I haven't even been there long enough to even know if we have a people problem. But in the 4 other agencies I've worked at, it's a people problem in that records is not, even though we do our annual records training, it's not an ingrained process for us to tag content or mark content with the appropriate retention or whatever the process is. In fact, I think that's the gap. We don't even know what the process is to use, even though the technology is there to support it. And so I think there's still a lot of education that needs to happen. And NARA does a great job at producing content. I think getting it out to the lowest level worker is where there's a gap there somehow. And maybe it's the records isn't given as high a priority within agency conversations. It's hard to say, right? Every agency is going to be unique in that respect, but there are definitely some challenges, and the technology is helping make that story easier. Like the capstone story is so much easier now, and others that are coming down the pike are so much easier. But I look forward to how that's going to enable us to make those conversations on the people side easier. So the easier we make it for people, the more likely it is we'll be able to comply.
Absolutely. And, I think you really are touching on one of what I believe, unique differentiators of M365, which is, should end users have to care about records management, or should it be automatically baked into their daily work through these workspaces, through Power Automate workflows that they just kick off an approval. They don't have to worry about like tagging it because it was in the right workspace. Actually on I believe Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, we're releasing a case study on the city of Marion in Australia, who's really done an amazing job of integrating together digital transformation of their city government operations, and then integrating records management into that. So no one knows it's happening. They have higher data quality, better decision making, and it's just an overall win for everyone.
Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to read it. Erica, before we wrap, I think this conversation is particularly interesting to me because it's not technology focused. It's process, it's people, like Jeremy said. If people are interested in learning a little bit more about your thoughts on this side, especially, what are your recommendations? I think we've got your LinkedIn here on the screen, but recommendations on how they can reach out to you, or where they can learn more from you?
Yeah, I check all social platforms equally, so whatever is most comfortable for you. Twitter, LinkedIn, my handle or username is the same on every platform. It's just my first name and my last name. In fact, if you want to email me, it's just my first name, last name @Microsoft.com. No dots, no dashes. They were kind enough to let me keep that consistency.
Nice. So as we wrap up, what's next for the information management program at Microsoft? What's coming up that you can talk about in the near future?
There's a lot coming. I think we covered on some of the big roadmap announcements. There's something coming next week. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention, but stay tuned to our blogs, awesome. our Microsoft, what do we call it? Our security compliance identity management blog on the tech community, as well as the Microsoft security high-level blog. I think there is a lot of innovation happening rapidly in this space, and who knows where we'll be 6 months from now, because we're gonna learn so much and release so much.
Well, that's exciting. Erica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in Denver, hopefully. And hopefully some of our, if you're listening to this now and you see us in Denver, come say hi. And then, again, thank you for joining us. This has been a great conversation. And I loved that it wasn't just a tech conversation, because it's so important to get the softer side of this right so that the tech can actually work for us. Yeah, so cheers. And for everyone listening, we'll see you next month when we talk to NARA about the processes and definitions about records and information management and governance that they are talking about, and the changes we should expect there. And thank you for joining us as usual. Make sure you subscribe to our channel here on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the AvePoint LinkedIn if that's where you are, so you get the latest updates from us. And feel free to reach out to Erica, Jeremy, Sarah, and Rima, who weren't able to join us this month, both on LinkedIn and on Twitter. And we look forward to talking to you next month. Cheers.
All right. Cheers. Take care.